Hi, Saul. Thanks for joining us. To start off, could you just tell us a bit about what you do generally and how you help Noni specifically?
I've been a coach for 22 years. Very much an individual skill specialist. I've spent 10 years working in academy football at Chelsea and Tottenham. Also, last 20 years I've been working individually with players one to one to support them with their individual technical and tactical game. I also work as a consultant. I've worked with clubs at Arsenal, doing stuff with Brighton at the moment, Red Bull clubs to support them in their individual programs. Noni came to me about 4 years ago when he was at PSV, wanted to do some extra. So what started off as an intense pre-season program turned into like a more of a long-term relationship. Obviously doing sessions when and where we could, and supporting him with some analyst feedback as well.
Great. And as you mentioned, you've coached him for 4 years. What do you think you've noticed in his game? What do you think have been the biggest changes, maybe the biggest improvement to his game?
Yeah, look, he's always been one of the most talented young players in world football. That's why so many clubs wanted him, and that's why he broke through to the first team at PSV early on. Obviously, look, like we say to Noni and all players in that position, you're judged on your your goals and your assists. So we've been trying to improve that, and that's improved. And also, we've been working a lot in terms of him being having balance on both sides. Obviously, he's known as like a Robin type player. He likes to cut inside, and now I think this season now he's really comfortable in going both ways and beating players. Obviously, the reason why Arsenal signed him is because he's so good in terms of his ball carrying, his 1v1, and being able to beat players in those situations. So he's a really exciting player who just keeps on getting better.
And you mentioned his two positions, and there's been a lot of chat since Arsenal have signed him about where they might want to play him, either as, in competition on the right wing with Saka, who's obviously a top player, or maybe as the left winger ahead of maybe Martinelli or Trossard. Where do you think he could fit in? Where do you think he'd want to start, preferably?
Yeah, I think, listen, Noni's good because he one of the main appeals of Noni's the player is he can play in different positions. Like I spoke to Noni about, Thomas Tuchel likes him playing on the left. And he also did that for England very successfully in the last games. He's probably one of England's best players. So, in answer to your question, I think he'll. I can't see him being going to Arsenal as being a backup for Saka. It's not realistic in terms of the sort of player Noni is, and also the money they spent on him. He's a first-rate player. So I see him obviously playing on the left, maybe playing on the right sometimes, where Saka rotates or comes out of the team. But for me, he's a starter in that. And if you look, actually, it's interesting because Martinelli and Trossard, good players, very good players with some different assets. Martinelli for me is a good transition player, really good on the break, and maybe not so good when teams are in a low block in terms of beating those players and those tight defensive. And Trossard's really good in 1v1, but maybe can't run beyond. Noni actually gives you both of those assets. He's so good at ball carrying, he can move a distance at speed with the ball in the counter, but also breaking down 1v1s and 1v2s as well. He's top. So for me, I'd be surprised he's not starting on the left there, and then maybe rotate with Saka on the right sometimes.
And just generally, how did he react to getting his move to Arsenal? They're obviously one of the best teams in the Premier League and in the world. And, Chelsea, obviously a massive club as well, but how did he react to getting that move?
Yeah, I think he's really buzzing and excited for the challenge. What I mean? Like I said, he's already moved to Chelsea, had that move to Chelsea, which is one of the biggest clubs in the world. So I don't think it's not going to phase him. But he's excited, he's ready, he's motivated. He wants to be one of the best players in the world. He wants to be, starting that team. So he's obviously excited to get started with Arteta and showing him what he can do.
And when he did sign for Arsenal, there was quite a lot of criticism from Arsenal fans, people on social media talking. There was even a petition going around. Do you know how Nani reacted to that? How would he react to
Yeah,
that sort of
I
thing?
think it's like duck off a water's back. I mean, and I think you're used to that once you're playing in the Premier League. He's had a few years under his belt now. You're used to that, that irrational fan reaction, and that was it. And also, it was a small minority, and also, people who work in the game, coaches and people, that know what a talent this young man is, and what he's gonna bring to the table. So I think you've got to get used to that. It's the ups and downs of Premier League football. You've got to take the knocks as well. But I mean, reality is, majority of Arsenal fans, I think, were really happy with that signing.
Definitely. And do you think he's even the sort of character that would fuel him to want to do better?
Yeah, I think. Listen, I've said it to him. Like he's like call him, mentality monster. He's so hungry for success. He's so hungry for the challenge. He backs himself. Do you know what I mean? So he's got no reservations about going into that top team already and making an impact. So I think it does spur him on. You know what I mean? And like I say, I think in the modern game, you've got to have a stiff chin, if you like, and take a few hits because that's what's going to come at you. Even when things are going well. So yeah, I don't think it's going to. I know it doesn't phase him, and he's just going to use it to make a big impact.
Just on that point of like having a stiff chin, he obviously had that famous incident last year where he posted what he did about Wolverhampton on his Instagram, got some criticism, then went out and scored a hat trick. Do you think that speaks to his sort of character and the way he backs himself?
100%, 100%. Young man's got a lot of self-confidence. It's not like overconfidence, not an ego thing. He just backs himself, believes himself. And the key thing as well, like I said, which is he's a great role model for all young players, all players generally, is that he works hard. He understands that I want to be the best. It's not like, well, I'm the best. I'm here. I'm already there. He knows the journey's just begun. He knows the hard work's begun. He puts a lot of work in extra as well to fulfill that and put. And that's really great to see from a young professional.
You mentioned obviously one of the biggest things that you and him work on is goals and assists. So, season on season, he's been improving that. Last year, he had 27 league starts, 7 goals, 3 assists. How happy was he with that return? How happy were you? What do you think he's aiming for this season?
Yeah, listen, I think it's happy because there's an improvement, but that wasn't a target which we set. So he wants to get more. Maybe he was out for a little bit with an injury, and also I think it can take into consideration where the team were as well. They weren't necessarily having a great time. So in answer to your question, yeah, he's always wants to get better every season, but we're looking for more next year. In answer to your question, a lot more goal involvements basically. So you want to see a year-on-year progression, but I mean, yeah, we want to get hit some better targets next year.
And I've heard you say before in a different interview that it can at times be a challenge to coach him because he's so driven. What do you think makes him so driven, and what sort of level does he believe he can achieve?
I think you'll find, obviously lucky I worked in academy football for many years and, some of those best young players, the outliers have that, the special players have that mentality, that personality where they're driven, they want to succeed, they understand, the more work you put in, the better you get. Nothing comes for free, if you like. So he has that. And, like I said, he backs himself and, he has the ability to go all the way and be one of the best in the world because he has those natural assets. There's work to do. He's not the finished article. And I know he doesn't believe he is, but he has that, and he's willing to work and recognise that. So it's really exciting. Like I say, exciting player, exciting signing for Arsenal, and I think he's people see what big impact he's going to make in this season and next seasons beyond.
Yeah, and you said he's obviously got work to do, and he knows that. What sort of things do you think he needs to do to elevate his game to that next level?
Yeah, well, it's like I say to any player in any position, what's gonna make an impact in your position. Like I said, goals and assists. That's what we've got to do. That's what we've got to support him into being better at. And how do you do that? So it's creating opportunities to provide those. So and that's really like breaking down those game changing moments in his position and try and do that. So what does that look like? Obviously, his forward passes, his crosses. I mean, and his goal scoring in and around the box. So that's the things you really got to focus on and get better on. And like I said, he's got tremendous 1v1 ability and ball carrying ability. He still wants to work on those and work on his weak foot, which he put a lot of work in. So I mean, like any player, you've got to try and understand what it looks like in his position, support them in breaking down, and then really work on fine tune those things.
Yeah, you've mentioned Mo Salah before when speaking about sort of Noni and maybe a player he can look to. Do you think that's what he is aiming for? Maybe someone who's hitting like insane amounts of goals and assists and constantly year on year hitting that level as a winger.
I think you've got to be, if you're serious about being a top Premier League player, you've got to aspire to be the best or one of the best. And if you look at the last few years, Salah definitely has been that in terms of his numbers, like we say, goals and assists. So absolutely, I think it's good to look at those players. Obviously, he's a different type of player, different sort of profile in terms of what he brings. But I mean, that's definitely if you're serious about being one of the best players in the Premier in the world, then you've got to look at players like that and say, right, that's the level. How can I get to that level? And those goal involvements.
And we've got a lot of Arsenal fans who watch the channel. Just for anyone watching who is an Arsenal fan, what do you think they can expect to see from Madueke? What can they expect to see on the pitch?
Yeah, like I say, Noni's an exciting player. Do you know what I mean? He'll bring entertainment, he'll bring flamboyance. I mean, that's the thing, when he gets the ball, he'll go and try and attack. He's not, backward and going forward, if you like. He wants to take players on, wants to beat players. He's got one of the highest shots ratios, in his position, lots of shots on target, lots of trying to beat players. What I mean? So he's an exciting player and he will create things. So, and also he's a hard worker. People will ask me and said, "Oh, what's his work rate like?" I've never come across anyone who works harder than this young man. I'm talking about working one-to-one with players, but also, working at some of the best academies in world football. No one's going to outwork this guy, so he's going to give it all, and make sure. And I know Arsenal fans won't be disappointed.
And just on that Salah thing, because Salah's almost an inside forward, he's not really a traditional touchline winger, and he's maybe a bit of a striker mold, and that's what helps him get so many goals and assists. Do you think? Whereas I think one of Nani's main strengths is being a touchline winger, one on one against his man. Do you think he's trying to maybe alter his game to get more inside to up his goals or assists, or
Well, yeah, I
how would
think
you
listen, it
balance that?
depends on how the manager wants you to play. If you actually look at his touches in the box, his data is actually really high in that area. So he gets a lot of that. So that's the thing, look at like the modern day wide winger has changed. You know what I mean? It is like you are like a wide striker. Your Mane, you talk about Salah, all these players here, like who, you need to be able to score goals and create goals. Gone are the days you just hugging the touchline and whipping it in the box. I mean, that's the changing nature of position. So
Mm,
you've got to bring, assists and goals to the table. So you've got to be just as good, out wide as you are in and around the box. And obviously that's why we spend a lot of time in that work. So, but that's the nature of the beast, if you like, and that's that's the sort of players, and he can do that. Do you know what I mean? He can do that, and as long as the manager gives him the license to get in those positions, he'll show you what he can do.
right. And I was just wondering more generally, for someone in your role, how do club managers and the clubs generally react to players having individual coaches to help them one on one?
I think maybe, yeah. I mean, honestly, it's not the greatest of relationships, or if there is anyone, they've been putting on my biggest fan. But the reality is that these guys are going to go and do it anyway. And look, and club players come to me and say, look, they say to me, "Oh, why don't you do it at the club?" And they offer him 10 or 15 minutes at the end. But as many players say, and then this is not anything bad, about any of the coach staff. I'm an individual specialist. This is what I've done for 22 years. Going on 22 years. That's what I do. That's how I see the game. So where they might get 10, 15 minutes extra at the end. Maybe it's not as thought out or designed as maybe I could do it. As it's obviously going to be good, and they think it's not really built around them. Or, for example, remember Balogun saying, when he came to me, as a young player before he signed at Monaco, and I was with him Arsenal, he said, I'll go do it, but maybe there's 7 or 8 other players in there, and he's maybe not number, he's not the top striker at the time, so maybe it's not really designed about his specific profile. So that's what I do. I give that individual attention, that individual need, but also that specialism, which I think is really unique. So that's I see the game differently. So I suppose that's what I offer.
And do you ever collaborate with the other coaches at the club who are involved with the whole team, or is it just sort of solo work that you'll do?
Yeah, they haven't. Yeah, because I mean they're not really particularly endorsing it at the moment. So it is solo work. But obviously, we talk to the player and obviously understand what their manager wants, what their coaches want, and obviously you're not trying to, well, we're not doing anything that goes against that. We're just working on those brilliant basics, if you like, those key things they need to get better, and just doing that bit extra really to get that those marginal gains that all players, need. But if you look at, the best players in the world, your Ronaldo's, Messi, Rooney, when he was, in England, all players are doing extras. They're doing an extra one after practice. So obviously, you need to be conscious of the load and where they are in terms of their loading cycle. But obviously, the best players want to do more. They need to do more. They understand they have to. So it's about trying to facilitate that the best way possible, I think.
And you've coached at Chelsea, Arsenal, and Spurs in the academies. I was just wondering, what do you think are some sort of key differences in the way they do things? They've all got good reputations, Chelsea and Arsenal especially. So, what have you noticed from your time there, at how they each do things?
Yeah, listen, every academy has their own different methodology, which is really unique. So no one of those, not one of those clubs you mentioned do things the same. I was saying when I first went to Chelsea, 2012, whenever it was, I noticed that then that's, this is a long time ago. Just, that I did notice that when I'm from Tottenham, that actually, at the time they were the biggest players on the block and their mentality was a bit different. They wanted to be the best academy in the world. So in terms of their planning preparation, I did notice that step up, I think. But in the time, that's a year I spent at Arsenal, was consulting with them, working throughout the academy, again, another top academy. So a lot of similarities in Chelsea and Arsenal, how they do things. And, people say, honestly, the two biggest players on the block in London in terms of academy football, in terms of the players they're developing. But